Hello YouTube, here I am in the sandbox of 1867 and you can see that I've recently finished working on a set of buildings that Cyberpiper has recently passed on to me, and these buildings are now ready for inclusion in the 1867 game, and they will be placed in position very soon. One friend has asked me, how do you get the buildings to lay exactly side by side along these faces so that they match exactly, so that when you place one building in the game, the other building is placed exactly in line with no overlap? Well, that's quite difficult because the buildings are made from mesh. If they were simple parts, like for instance these two parts here, you know that every face is flat, every edge is straight, and every interior angle is 90 degrees. And so if you use Snap to Grid, enable the first field move, if you move one object, it will snap exactly in line with the other object, and here these two are placed exactly side by side. If you weren't using Snap to Grid because you wanted a bit more flexibility in where to place these objects, you could still do it and place these two exactly side by side by looking at the size of the object. The size object here is 8. You add on the size of the other object, 8. 8 and 8 makes 16. You then divide by 2 because the centers are in the middle and not on the edge. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. And then you either add or subtract that from the dimension. Let's have a quick look and see what dimension is. Oh, it's exactly 190. So I look at this one, I'm going to subtract 8 from 190. 182. And there we are, the two objects lay exactly side by side. But when you're working on mesh, let's look at a mesh object like this house. You can see by the blue outline that the faces are not exactly in line with their dimensions, and you won't know this, but also the faces aren't flat. There's a slight curvature in the face, and the interior angles are not 90 degrees. The interior angle here is acute. We've got an acute angle here. I'm guessing it looks about 70 or 80 degrees. So it's going to be really difficult to place one building which is made from mesh alongside another building when the interior angles are not perpendicular and when the outline of the shape doesn't coincide with the actual dimensions of the shape that you see on the screen. The blue rectangular cuboid does not coincide exactly with the dimensions of the building. So it's going to be very much more difficult getting two buildings to be exactly side by side. So what I've done is I've set up the last building to show you how I achieved it. Now first of all, I've removed all the accessories from the building because it's a lot easier to move something smoothly if there are few parts. This building's got just two parts. It's got the outside and the roof. So when I place buildings side by side, I always do it before I add the windows and doors and chimneys and dormers and guttering, because if I try and move an object with additional items, you get jagged, jerky movement, and I want a smoother movement. So to get these two buildings to lay side by side, this is the technique that I use. I res a part in world and I place the part roughly halfway along the dimension of the object that I am moving. And here the Y dimension is the vertical, so I've placed this part halfway, roughly halfway along that vertical dimension. And then this is what I do. I click on the object, click on F, which is the shortcut key for focus, click on the object that I want to move, and because I've placed this halfway along the dimension, you can see that the arrow is in view, so I can see it really clearly. And what I do is I use this yellow object as an anvil, something that I can navigate using. So I'm going to look at this area just here on my anvil, and I'm going to move the last house slightly sideways, gently, until there, until I can get that gap to close up exactly. And because there are no doors and windows in this part here, I can move this really smoothly, and I can see when there's an overlap by a slightly more solid line. There you see a slightly more solid vertical line that appears white, and I can see obviously when it's a gap because you've got a dark vertical line. So all I do is res an object halfway along the vertical dimension upon the join of the two houses, and then use that as an anvil upon which I can then focus my eye, so when I move the house I can get it to lie exactly correct. And if I'm a pixel or two out, sometimes I find that it just helps to rotate the screen very slightly and do it again. I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy. And there the two are laying side by side. Right, that's it. How do you get them to be exactly parallel? Oh, that's even harder. And let's rotate this one. If they weren't parallel, what I would do was I would get the front faces to lay exactly in line as I've done before. I told you this is more difficult. Again, I'm using that yellow block as an anvil, and I've got my eye on that point just there, and I'm just going to move this house around until, got it, there we are, until the two bits are exactly in line. And then what I do is I res a second part on the other side. I'll just put it in position, and I'm going to enlarge that slightly because of the big gap. There we are. Now what I do is I look at this gap here and I half it in my eye. So I'm looking at that position, and I'm going to rotate the building and so it lays in the halfway position. About there. There we are. That's about halfway. So I was looking at that gap and halving it, because obviously if I rotated it so I got the building to match exactly, then the gap would only transfer from the front to the back. But because I've halved the angle, that is, I have bisected the angle, then I've spread the error halfway on the front and halfway on the back, and so now the buildings lay roughly parallel to one another. And then I can then use that first trick to get the buildings to lay side by side. Right. Well, let's go back to bit more work. I'm going to work on some edits, look over the buildings and make sure everything is perfect before they get added to the game. And while I'm doing that, I'll say goodbye to you and let you leave. Don't forget, subscribe to this channel for more news and updates from the world of 1867. Bye. Right, back to work. Start beginning. And check the doors and windows.